Today I'm going to talk about sin. Good old story about a priest many years ago at a parish in the middle of summer, but no air conditioning. Hot and humid. Everybody was just sweating, just sitting there doing nothing. So the priest got up and said, "Today I'm going to talk about sin." And he said, "Personally, I'm against it." And he sat down. You're not going to get off that easy. Now you already introduced this, and you know about first Sunday of Lent, Jesus out into the desert. And that's what Lent is for us to go out in the desert and deal with what's inside of us. Remember, the desert is not just in the scriptures, not just a physical place. We can go into the deserts of our inner selves. And I'm always telling you to read the Bible, read the scriptures, look for the deeper meaning. For instance, Mark's gospel, this is very short. Jesus went into the desert and he was tempted by Satan. Now remember, in the Bible, Satan is not a person, not what we would envision as the devil. You know, the little green man with the pitchfork and the horns and trying to entice us, come in. No, the Satan then in scriptures is a deceiver. We would call it rationalizing. If you've ever been tempted to do something that in your spirit you knew wasn't right, but yet you wanted to do it, and somehow you rationalized it, that nobody's going to get hurt and this is good and pleasurable or whatever. That's the Satan that Jesus was dealing with. He dealt with the same thing because he was fully human like us. He had the weakened human nature. And he struggled with the wild beasts. And again, don't think of animals. Think about that the temptations, the desires within all of us. We all have them, all in different ways. But those are the wild beasts inside of us. Our passions, our temptations, our allurements, things that we think will give us pleasure, but we know that, or maybe we don't even know it at the moment, but they're not right. And if you've pursued some of that in life, eventually you will find out, whoops, this was not a good decision. Now that's what we're invited to do, to go out into that desert with Jesus and deal with those inner weaknesses, compulsions, desires, whatever word you want to give them. And somehow to bring God into that. God knows about all of our sins and weaknesses and evil desires, and again, whatever words you want to use to describe it. Bring God into that. And we have to continually do that. Because just doing it once, usually for most people, is not enough. Look at Noah today in the first reading. I don't know if you read the story, you know about the ark and so on. But Noah wasn't that good of a person. After he built the ark and, the story today, and then he went back to live, there's a story in the Bible, just read it. One day Noah got drunk, and he was laying in his tent naked with the flap open. What was that all about? But God still pursued him, even though he wasn't necessarily good in all ways. The same with us. Even though we're not good in all ways, God is still pursuing us. And this time of Lent, then, is to bring God into that. And so our Lenten penances, once again, I've said every year, prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Think about that every day. Prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. The penances, however, should link up with whatever you have just thought about in your inner being into which you want to bring God. The penances should link up with that. So if you have trouble with anger, giving up candy doesn't work. Or, you can add to the list. I don't have to go through everything. Whatever is that inner weakness, that inner compulsion, that inner desire, that is not of God, pick a penance that will link up with it and bring that more and more into the presence of God. That's what this is about. Most of us just choose something frivolous, really, because we don't want to face those inner weaknesses. But that's what Jesus struggled with. Now, that's the one half of sin. We call that personal sin. And again, if you're like I am and in the church, that's primarily what we've been taught. When we think about sin, most of us immediately think about personal sins, things that we have done wrong, that we know are wrong, but somehow we still did them. Those are the things that we usually confess when we go to confession. Our personal mistakes, sins, what do you want to call them? But that's only half of what sin is. The other half now is what we call social sin, in which we all participate primarily by our silence. Some of you probably have never heard about social sin yet, because it's relatively new in our thinking. It's only, some of you know I'm interested in sociology, the movement of cultures. The idea of social sin has only arisen the last 100 years when society became more urbanized and we live more with systems of government. And whenever you have a system of government, it leads to sin in the system. Leads to sin in the system. I wrote out a definition of social sin. Sin that exists within any structure in society that oppresses other people, violates human dignity, stifles freedom, and imposes inequality. Well, I'm going to do it again. Memorize this. Social sin is sin that exists within any structure that oppresses other people, violates human dignity, stifles freedom, and imposes inequality. Whenever you have a system, a structure, there will be sin. The classic case is the Catholic Church. The elaborate structure in which it is full of social sin. We're just realizing the results of it with the sexual abuse crisis. How the church covered that up. That's a social sin. Think about government. All of the things that go on that you know as well as I, that oppress other people and violate human dignity and stifle freedoms and imposes inequality. Other examples. We all want to buy things as cheaply as we can, don't we? But when you buy a shirt that's inexpensive, do you ever think about how the shirt got to the store and who made it? Is the shirt cheap because on the other end of the line, somebody made it who wasn't getting a decent daily wage? Do you ever think about, that's a social sin. Think about the violence in our society. We all complain about it, but we're all afraid to make legislation to control it. That's a social sin. Some of you know that I'm into recycling. Do you ever go out and look at those big landfills? Do you know what's happening? As we pile up our garbage and it decomposes, the runoff is a poisonous liquid which will poison the future generations. We say, well, I'm not going to be around. What do I care? That's a social sin. Think about when you buy a car. You think about how much gas it's going to use and how it's going to pollute the environment or whatever. Those are social sins that we all participate in. Now, as I mentioned some of those examples, you say, well, what can I do? I'm just one person. We participate by our silence. We participate by rationalizing that I'm only one person, I can't do anything about that. But if more and more people link together, we can do something. Are you following the murders in Florida, at the school? More and more people now are saying, that's enough. And as more and more people gather, maybe something will be done within the system. That's what we're dealing with today. Personal sin? Go out into the desert. Struggle with what is inside of you and me. But think about social sins and what we can do to bring the presence of God into that. Now that's what Jesus did. Don't do any of this because I say so. Think about Jesus. Jesus was facing the same thing. He went out into the desert because if you think about it long enough, you're going to want to become a hermit. I want to get out of here. But then after struggling with it, he came back and faced it. He faced the sins of himself and others and the society in which he lived. And he said that this is where we have to bring the kingdom. The kingdom is here when we act together to manifest the presence of God the way God would want us to live in our society today. That's the challenge. That's why on your sheets, if you look at them again, first question is your personal sin. The second is social sin. What will you do to help lift the burdens of someone else? You know, we're building the rainbow. Last week it was the purple. Today it's the blue. And then what is it? Green and yellow and red. I don't know what all the colors are. But what you write is going to be up there next week, making the rainbow. So again, in about after the petitions, we're going to collect all these. So we're going to give you 1 minute now to finish it if you haven't already, and then put it in the collection basket.